Duolingo, because they are considered to be like ethanol of gamification at the moment. But to be honest, not very big fan, because I think that they're using a lot of black hat motivation, and it doesn't work for me personally. So I got like, too much pressure on me. Stop it. I don't want to.
Hey, engagers, and welcome to Professor Game. As you know, we are the #1 gamification podcast, and we explore how gamification, games, and game thinking help us boost engagement to multiply retention and build stronger products. And I'm Rob. I'm the founder. I'm a coach at Professor Game, and I'm also the head of engagement strategy Europe at the Octalysis Group, which is a leading gamification consultancy, and professor of gamification, game-based strategies, and other solutions at top business schools around the world, including IE Business School, EFMD, and EBS University. And before we dive into today's super interesting conversation with Tetiana, if you're missing anything around struggling or any struggles with retention, churn, engagement in your product, in your business, and want to turn that around, please look at our guide, The Core Drives in the Wild, to see how we successfully use motivation in business situations. And from the experience of many of our past guests, as you know, we have plenty by this date. All you have to do is click on the link in the description and you'll get the email sequence. So Tetiana, we always like to know if our guests are ready, if they're prepared for the interview. So we need to know, Tetiana, are you prepared to engage?
Absolutely.
We have Tetiana Kobzar. Is that a good pronunciation? Is that decent?
That's right.
She has 18 years of experience building software products that people actually want to use. And she applies gamification and behavioral science to design human-centered solutions for healthcare, wellness, and education, working with everyone from early-stage startups to hospital innovation teams. And she's the creator of what she calls a Comportance Framework, which is a 7-step methodology that brings structure and behavioral science principles to the product design process, giving teams clarity, alignment, and full ownership. And she shares her ideas through her Behavioral Design Thursday on LinkedIn series and speaks at industry events on the practical applications of behavioral design in the modern world. Tetiana, is there anything that we're missing that we should know before we get started?
No, thank you. Thank you for having me and for such a nice introduction. Yeah, that's me.
Absolutely.
And I'm also
Yes.
And I'm also a big fan of Octalysis approach, and and Yuka Chow is like my idol. So that's very, very nice that we share the same vision and approach to the motivation and engagement.
Amazing. So, Tetiana, what does a regular day with you look like? What are you doing in these days? What gets you fired up? What are the kinds of activities you're performing these days?
Now I'm in a quite interesting stage of my life, because I used to be a founder of a company that got acquired recently.
Nice.
So that's why now I'm in a little bit like a transition period, and I am.
Congratulations, of course, I'm sure, in order.
Thank you. Yeah, and also my daily life consists of working with my clients and with my team. Also, I do a lot of self-education. Not, I spend less time on self-education that I want, because it's always
I'm sure we all do.
I buy the books, I buy the courses and everything, and probably spend like 1 hour maximum per day, but I want to spend 8. But I think that my day is more or less what you can imagine from the consultant and tech founder, because I also work on my own little startup in parallel. So a lot of things to do, a lot of different hats to wear.
So that sounds super interesting, Tetiana. Thank you very much for sharing that. And the next thing that we like to do with our guests is always go all in, right? We talk about your favorite fail or first attempt in learning. And having been acquired from a startup and having all of these things that you've been doing, I'm sure that you have plenty of these moments. So can you share one of those with us, especially if it has to do with behavioral design and all these things? We would be very, very interested to be there, live that moment with you, and potentially take out some of those lessons that brought you here.
I think the biggest, realizations of things that I did probably not very right. They are not related that much to the behavioral design or gamification, but more about the business administration and those type of things. But in general, what I would recommend everybody who is, it doesn't matter if if you want if you plan to sell your business, or you just want to build it forever, or you are building your product, is to focus on the recurrent revenue. That is something that I realized. And actually, so to do the product design, to give this value every month to the users, instead of give them one piece of useful content or useful functionality and then lose them. So that's for the end game, and for so design for the end game and further stages, to give value all the time, because that relates to anything, to work with the client, to work with users, so do the product or service. Because that is something that your business is your recurrent revenue, and all the rest is not. So some ad hoc people who come and go, clients who come and go, they actually could bring you some additional money, but they do not add value to your business. So that is something that I learned through the failure, let's say.
Is there any moment when you realized that you were not designing for the end game, as you very well said, which was now I better start thinking about this in a different way? Especially, again, you mentioned end game, and it's literally the same structure of thinking. You're not just thinking about discovery. So how do people find out about you in marketing? You're thinking about how to retain them across the whole journey. Was there any particular moments when you were in your business that this happened that you can share, of course?
Yeah, actually, because from my business that got acquired is more, it's not a product, it's more like a service business. So my users are my clients as well. And that is that is a usual situation when you are putting so much effort at the beginning of the engagement. You are care very much about your clients and the products that you are building for them. But then, when the relationship go on, you just, everybody is having this status quo, and you're just that is, I would say that it's like this Pareto principle, that you are spending 80% of your time on the clients who bring you 20% of value. Because usually, the good clients, they are not causing you any problems. They are not complaining. They are just, they are just working, and you're working together, and that's it. But the clients who you communicate regularly, who has some problems, who have always complaining or something, and eventually they will, if they start to do it, they probably not exact match with you, but you spend so much effort and so much time on those type of clients, instead of better investing it into building the relationship with the existing ones. So that's something that I realized at some moment, and I changed the approach, and started to give more of my time and attention to improve our relationship and improve the products of our clients.
Sounds amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Tetiana. And actually, how about we turn that around and look for a proud moment? One of those things that actually did work well. And hopefully this time we will tie it directly to some of that gamification that I'm sure you've done plenty of.
Yeah, because gamification is definitely my passion, and my favorite products that I participated in are gamified, either game-based solutions or gamified ones. Frankly speaking, I like game-based more, because it requires more, there are more creativity and more, more ways to make the experience truly engaging. Because usually gamification is when you are just adding some elements to the non-gamified product. It's rather, it's similar, and a lot of owners and a lot of founders, they prefer very, let's say, common approaches, the points, badges, leaderboards, and streaks and other things. And that's why game-based learning, game-based products are my favorite. So one of my favorite ones is that we made for Alder Hey Children Hospital. That's a gamified application that allows that helps children with their speech therapy. So the kids, they instead of just only seeing doctor once per week and that's it, they have the app that helps them to practice between those speech therapy sessions, and the clinician, they set up their goal for this week. They set up their tasks, and tasks are made in like form of some mini games that they need to play. And on their way of playing, they are pronouncing some sounds and like practicing their assignment. So that's one that I um, really enjoyed, and that's one of the recent ones. Another example that I also like love, and I still, so that way I used to I worked on it like about like 4 years ago, but it's still like also one of one that I really love. And because it's like it has been on the market for a long time, I see that a lot of users and a lot of institutions use it as well. We replaced 27 pen and paper tests that like people with some cognitive impairments or the state of cognitive function that needs to be checked regularly. So they used to do it like, in the doctor's office, and they're bored and they are not motivated to use it. And instead we replaced it with like mini games that they are motivated to play. They are engaged. They want to do it. And the tablet actually measures a lot of additional data as well, like all the timestamps, how the fingers trembling or not. Also, like, recording the voice and other things. So that's like two of my most favorite examples.
So you mentioned I never, very, at least not in public, I don't usually engage on the discussions where people it's like, oh, that looks a little bit more, that's more game-based learning. Oh no, this is serious games. This is applied games. This is gamification. Usually I tend to go for, using gamification as a sort of umbrella term where you can be creating a full-blown game, as you were suggesting. Or it's something that is more on the, we can call it more corporate side in a way, where you don't feel like you're in a game, but you're getting, LinkedIn using the progress bar when you're creating your profile is a very good example of that. It's gamified, right? So you're using a strategy that you learned from games. It's using the underlying principles, core drive 2, development and accomplishment. All of that is there, but it doesn't feel like you're in a game, all the way to something that could either literally be a game or feel like a game. But I was curious because then you were saying these two applications, and that's some of the typical stuff that I could be working on nowadays as a consultant. So where do you draw that line for, in your experience, for, serious games or however we're going to call them, and something that is more in the terms of gamification?
Actually, I do not draw this line
Okay.
because, for me, I'm very much with you about that. Like, I have a bit wider term. It's like behavioral design. That basically, so following the Octalysis is like gamification, but it describes a lot of principles that are
Yeah,
covered in
for sure.
behavioral design as well, because that's about motivation, about what triggers users, what like makes them like or dislike or act or not act. And there are like, different
Anti-core
applications for the,
drives.
yeah, exactly. And all those like, black hat, white hat motivation techniques. So all,
There's a lot of videos, by the way, around, and I think they're still in the open from UCI, analyzing different behavioral science things through the lens of Octalysis framework, like from Maslow to DC and Ryan with intrinsic motivation, like all of that. He's done many of the analysis through, like you see it through the Octalysis, and you can do, it's like, oh, this works this way, and flow as well, and all of that through those frameworks. So yeah, absolutely there. We always like to talk about gamification and behavioral design for sure.
yeah. So I'm just, yeah. So when I'm saying like gamification versus game-based learning or game-based solution, that's more of the distinction that my clients usually have.
Mm,
So when somebody
okay.
comes to you and say, help me with the gamification, and you are like, I am starting to tell them about it. So that the gamification actually is much wider term
The
that brings,
gamification, yeah. I've heard
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
too
So
many times.
yeah, exactly. So they like, so you're just, that's about like motivating users. It's about like making them laugh, making them return through the like and other things. And people say, yeah, okay, but we want something more like Duolingo, or something like that,
Yeah,
So
of
then,
course.
and then that's why, it is. And I'm sure that you have seen this pattern as well, through your consultancy, that sometimes people, that's like a good case, creative one, when people come to you and say, okay, so I want to bring like to make my app more engaging, or I want my users to return more or do some particular action that they are not doing, but I want them to do, or I want to change their behavior, and keep this and make it consistent. So when the task is more, let's say, when the people come to you with the problem and you together find the solution, so then you have more tools to integrate. But sometimes people come you with the idea what they want to have, and they just want your help with shaping it. So they already did some research. They want to do more the traditional gamification that everybody understands of how it works, and they want to try, and they just need a little tweaks or something. So that's not a big, let's say, strategic task, but more a local tactical one. So that's why I made this distinction. But I'm
Makes
absolutely
sense.
with you that that's a wider term that covers more.
Tetiana, when you're facing one of these projects, whether big or small, I'm guessing that you run through some kind of thought process or strategy or something, what we call the 5-step process in Octalysis design. I don't know if you use that, something different. Like, how do you approach these problems, and especially, of course, getting to the solutions that you create?
I use a lot my own framework that named Comportance to make a structured approach to validate the request and make it a more strategic session, let's say, and integrating. So when it's come to the part of emotion, I usually refer to Octalysis. So all my clients heard about Octalysis, and I share your Octalysis group resources to display or explain some of the principles. So my framework, it combines different, let's say, best practices for each step. And emotion and motivation, I always refer the Octalysis, and usually we start with the analysis of the analytics of the current solution. What do they have, what they don't have, what they want to change, and yeah.
Amazing. Can you give us a quick brush through your 7 steps, like the one that you mentioned, or however it is that you approach this?
Yeah, sure, with pleasure. So Comportance, it was I invented it based on my experience working with different founders, with different startups, with different products. And I see that sometimes people focus on one part of the process and not thinking too much about other ones. So when people apply an agile, they're usually more about the iteration and the continuous delivery, but they are not thinking too much about, I don't know, why they are doing this and what they're trying to achieve at the very end. So they are too iterative. What I see also, in a lot of cases, the behavioral component, so the gamification motivation component, is very often missed. So people
Not
rarely think,
non-existing most of the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, the
yeah. So
function is
that,
there. They can do it, so
yeah,
they will do it.
yeah, exactly. And that's the question that a lot of founders, they are stopping and think, okay, how do we want our users to feel when they're using our app? We don't know. They want to be able to solve their problem, but you can do it in a very different way. So we start in the Comportance, we start with the 7 questions. So we start with the goal. So that's also a question that not always people know the answer to. Say what we are trying to achieve. So what it's usually either what problem we are trying to solve, or what we want to improve, what situation we want to improve. And
And I'm
that's
guessing that oftentimes they think they have the answer very clear, and then they start explaining it, and they have no idea what they really want.
exactly, yeah. And without goal, you can move to very different directions. So that's a very strategic part. Then it's the question, so how it looks like. So measurable result that we are trying to achieve. So what moment of time, how do we know if we reached the goal or not? And it should be possible to say at any particular moment of time. So that's why I try to bring it to some measurable, basically smart goal set up. So it's it should be achievable, it should be measurable, it should be all everything. So that you can
Specific or relevant and timely. Yes.
yeah. So you're having this goal, and then the next question is, and what is the current baseline? So what are your current metrics? And that's surprising enough. Another point that very often people do not have answer to, that's because they are not measuring enough of data. And that's thing that I'm 100% pushing all the time, that we need to measure as much data as possible. And so our decisions should be as data driven as possible. So log all the user activities, analyze it regularly, even if probably at the moment you are not going to analyze it. Collect it anyway, because you will be at the moment when you want to analyze it and you want to know what is happening and to where, because that's always when it comes to engagement, when it comes to user behavior, it is always, it's not like 1 or 0, they are doing it or not, because catching the exact moment when they are drop off, or when they struggle, when they spend more time that we want them to do. So probably, and tweaking each of those, the more, the smaller you can do this, measurement and the point of identifying the problem, the better. So that's for the data. We need to measure, we need to understand what we want to achieve and what is our current level, where are we now? And then it comes to the emotion. So how we want users to feel when they are using our app, what emotional and motivational drives we want to trigger to get them to do the actions that we want. What is and it affects a lot from when we understand the positioning of how we and our product is going to be received by users. So who we are, in this, let's say, role play. Are we a strict coach, or are we a friend who are giving advice, or are we an expert who is sharing the knowledge, or we are the teacher, or a lot of possible this positioning, and it's applied to all the language we use, all the even the colors, the tone, and all other things. So that's very important. That's here where Octalysis and more the gamification techniques come in place. The next part is, let's make a hypothesis, and usually that depends on the process where we're applying this. If it's the new product, so that will be maybe main functionality. So what is valuable for users? Because that's another thing that founders, especially the first time founders, they have a tendency to bring too many ideas, so application will solve all the problems at once, but to make one hypothesis main. So okay, so at first our application will be using this problem. If it goes well, we will obviously add new functionality, but focus on something smaller. So if it's possible to have one hypothesis, it's the best. And then the next step is minimum validation. So that's more or less an MVP approach. So how we can still bring this value, but make it as fast as possible and as simple as possible, and see if it if the app actually, if our users behave in the app as we expect them, and if it's valuable, and so the iteration. And then the cadence. Cadence is when we start, when we measure if our hypothesis is working or not, how we measure it, and how we decide if it's it's okay, we need to tweak, or no, it was a wrong one and we need to iterate again. So that's actually a little iteration to the measuring the current results, how far they are from goal, are we moving in the right direction, and repeat, this cycle. So that's a comportance framework, trying to combine everything into one more consistent and organized approach.
Nice. Very interesting and very deep as well. And from your experience, Tetiana, is there some sort of best practice when you're looking for solving these problems? There might be things that you see cross throughout, and maybe not a silver bullet, but something that, if you think about this, if you do this, it would probably help your project be a lot better.
I don't think that there is one advice or something that you can do that improves everything. It's more, again, so that's rather what I see a lot in startups, and as I already mentioned, that they are not thinking about their users as people who are irrational. So they are more building a product for the functionality efficiency, and they are treating people as rational agents rather than people who have their like cognitive biases, who have behavioral biases, and who need to be addressed from the different perspective. So that's what I would recommend to always think about people who are using it rather than robots. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and also what tendency I see in a lot of applications is the complexity. So that's um, a lot of founders have a tendency to think that the more you have to offer, the more valuable your app becomes. But in reality, it's different because, like, again, very basic behavioral design principle about the cognitive overload. So when we see too many functionality, we just feel tired and stupid and we want to just run away instead of using it. So
when
yeah,
when
that's
people when people see that and say, yeah, but more functionality, it's good, you can do more things, and it's like, well, have you ever gone to one of these restaurants that instead of handing you a very simple direct menu where you can choose, of course you need choice, you want choice, then instead they hand you like a booklet that has like 20 pages, right? So many things happen, from an operational perspective. There's a lot of frozen food, so that's on one side not great, but let's assume that they are able to maintain some operational efficiency there and still do it well. How do you choose? Do you spend half an hour, 1 hour going through the whole menu? Or do you do things like go to the back page and look at the incorporated options and ignore absolutely everything else anyways? So cognitive overload is a real thing, even though people, even when they hear about it, they understand and they see the data. It's like, yeah, but still, they should be able to do more things. That's always good. It's really, really hard to sort of grasp and feel that. So I always, at least in the place I've lived in, that tends to be the Indian or the Chinese restaurant problem, where they have these huge booklets. So I always talk about the Chinese restaurant, the Indian restaurant, depending on where people are from, to explain the difficulties that then you face, and that it is a real thing, like it's not a made up stuff or principle. Tetiana,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I agree with you. My favorite example, and that actually from real life, I opened like one of these period tracking apps, and I didn't find how to track my periods because it was like, there were so many different articles about like, women's health, like some advertisement of different products and other things. And actually, where is the calendar? I didn't find it.
Where's the real reason I came here?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Tatiana, with all the experience that you have and the plenty of people you've talked to and looked at and researched, as you were mentioning, purchasing all these books and courses, some of them not finishing, maybe you're curious about hearing one of these people on the Professor Game podcast, sort of a featured guest.
Bless you.
Spring is here.
Bob, actually, I'm pretty curious. It would be interesting, actually, to hear more of Yukacho. I haven't. Did you invite him for the podcast, by the way?
I think he is the one who's been the most. I'm not sure about that
Yeah.
number, but
Yeah.
probably is.
So,
He's
but
been 4 times, and he's episode 1 and 400 as well. So he has interesting episodes there. Of course, the first one is talking about the Octalysis framework in general. There's one on Octalysis Prime, the remote framework that they launched some time ago, and kids and gamification as well. We talked about that. I was about to have my first kid, so I thought it was very timely. But yeah,
that's true. That's true.
I've known him for quite a few years, and just recently we started working together formally.
Yeah. I saw it in LinkedIn. That's really cool. Looking for, yeah, so that's like, I mean, that I can read and listen to Yuka Chow for like, for whatever times he can
Yeah.
do it. So that's cool. But actually it would be interesting to listen some of people who probably from Duolingo, and I'm not sure if you had invited some of them, because
No.
because they are considered to be like the ethelon of gamification at the moment. But I would be really curious to I to be honest, not very big fan of, because I think that they're using a lot of black hat motivation, and it doesn't work for me personally. So I got like, too much pressure on me. Stop it! I don't want to. I don't want to use it. But I see that it's like a huge success, and It would be like really curious to know how they do it. So is it like because of how? I mean, probably nobody would answer those questions honestly. because there's probably there like some secrets and data, nobody is sharing it like this. But that would be interesting to know how they grow and how their retention works, because like for me it feels like it should bring to burnout, but they are growing. And is it for their like new users acquisition, or it's like so that's just they are finding their niche for the people who actually like this type of motivation, and it works for them like for the longer run. And so that is something that would be interesting to discover
I'm
more.
looking for it as we speak. I know a colleague from the Octalysis group wrote a blog post about Duolingo and
Okay.
how it's or the discussion on whether it's really a language learning app or something else. Maybe you'd find that one interesting as well. But it's a very interesting case study for sure. There's lots of black hat motivation. I did an episode analyzing the streaks as a mechanic because I've always found it very interesting and very useful. It's very Duolingo is not a freelance language learning app. It is, and that's how the whole
Okay.
article starts. I'll link it up in the show notes. But also the streak mechanic is very interesting because it's true you have all that that pressure and people do come back for that and so on. But it is very black hat, and what you're always avoiding with these kinds of loss techniques, you're threatening to lose your streak, but you never really want them to lose the streak, right? Like, how do you manage that near miss situation, or actually that near missing? You're almost missing out on. How do you manage that? And the rage quitting, somebody who's been on a streak for 4,000 days, all of a sudden falls sick, falls asleep, like whatever, and they lose a 4,000-day streak. That person, in my opinion, or in my experience, what I've seen is never coming back. Right? Never, not
That's
a
true.
single. Like they'll hate the app after that. So it's a difficult one, but they do have amazing results as well. Amazing results in terms of retention, among others. Tetiana, and from all those books that you've read, all that stuff that you've seen and you've gone through, is there any book that you would highlight? Any recommendation for the engagers?
Apart from gamification, yes, by actionable,
The actionable
part of
gamification
actionable
by you.
gamification.
It could be that one if that's what you want, for sure.
So, I mean, that actionable gamification is one of my favorite books, and like I totally recommend it to everyone who didn't read it before. I purchased but haven't read yet 10,000 Hours by Yuka. So I'm not sure yet. I cannot recommend it yet. I'm sure it's good, but I didn't read it. So one of my favorite books and it's actually the first one that I ever read on the topic. It's Influence by Cialdini. So love it. It's like, still relevant despite being written, I don't know how many years ago. And yeah, it's one of the really, really good ones. And Design of Everyday Things. I recommended 3 instead of 1, but I hope that's okay.
So you mentioned the Cialdini, the Design of Everyday Things, and Yukai's book. Perfect. Tetiana, what would you say is your superpower in this whole behavioral design situation?
I think my superpower is ability to go into details, but keeping the bigger picture in mind as well. So not getting buried into the little things, and at the same time not losing the bigger picture and keeping it in mind, and being able to align the team to follow this track.
Sounds like a very useful superpower these days, for sure. Tatiana, we get to the difficult question now, or at least the one that I would find the most difficult, which is, what is your favorite game?
My favorite game, I think, still is Civilization. So I really like it. I like strategy games. I like games that are not too stressful, not speed based or reaction based. I'm not very good at that. So yeah, I think that Civilization, and it, because I am a curious person as well, and it brings some interesting I don't know, historical moments or something. I like to read, about some characters or about somebody, in the Wikipedia, or now it's more chatting with the different AI about who was this person, what did they do, what they are famous for. Even with my kids, we play now this board game. It named Similo. And it is so the association game when you like need to code with the cards, some like another cards, whatever. So I will not explain the rules, but it's like we bought the edition about the like history people from the history. And that is like, super interesting because every game, we are just setting the table and some random people appear there and we are just sitting and looking in the AI if we don't know the story of the person or like some interesting fact about them or something like that. So that is like another cool thing.
So Tetiana, thank you very much for all the advice, everything that you've shared. It's been an amazing journey, at least for me. I hope you've had fun as well. Is there anything else to tell the engagers, any final piece of advice, and of course, where we can find out more about what you're doing nowadays?
I am most active in LinkedIn, so I would encourage everyone to follow me there. And as for the final advice is, I would say that I would advise to experiment more, do more like controlled experiments, data-driven decisions, and more like courage, let's say, to change things.
Courage, that's a difficult one for sure. But it is very, very important, especially in these initiatives where things are changing, things are different, people might be expecting, not expecting. It can be a tough one for sure. Tetiana, thank you again very much for taking your time and investing and being here with the engagers, sharing your knowledge, your understanding. However, as you know and the engagers know as well, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. And thank you once again, engagers, for hanging around after this interview. And as I mentioned at the start, if you are interested in looking at our guide of the core drives in the wild, especially for corporate and business settings, now as a consultant in the Octalysis group, I have access to some significant and interesting data, and I can talk a lot more about the way we see things through the Octalysis framework. Just go to the link below, click there, and we will send you an email sequence with all of these cases, core drives, one by one, analyzing different situations and giving our strategic advice. So engagers, thanks again for staying around, and I'll talk to you and see you soon.